Hey, good morning and welcome to Courageous Conversations Training. My name is Pam Clark-Reitenbach, and I'm the Executive Director of the Northern Illinois Center for Nonprofit Excellence. We are grateful for our partnership with the United Way of Northwest Illinois for providing funds through the Healing Illinois initiative, making it possible to offer this session and the 4 DEI trainings that we've been offering free to all participants. So thank you, Connie Kraft at United Way of Northwest Illinois. Our facilitator and instructor for today's session is Traci O'Neill Ellis. Traci is a Chicago area-based attorney, HR executive, and frequent speaker on race, law, politics, equity, and radically inclusive leadership. As we saw at our last DEI session, Traci is a fierce advocate for social justice. We are so pleased to have Traci back with us today. Please help me to welcome Traci O'Neill Ellis.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Pam. And I am going to share my screen. One moment. All right, so we are here today to have a courageous conversation about race. And I want to, I'm gonna be talking about a couple of frameworks for having these conversations. And in the course of sharing the frameworks and kind of theory and some lessons with you, I'm hoping to also be modeling how to have courageous conversations about race. And I want to start out with our agreements, okay? And those of you who were with me earlier this month have seen these before, and you know that I go through these agreements and try to set the ground rules, or I hate the word rules, but try to set some agreements, I guess. I'm a lawyer, so I like to think of these things rather than rules as that we're joining in agreement with this. So the first 4 on the left come from one of the frameworks we're going to be talking about today, which is Glenn Singleton's Courageous Conversations about Race. And so it starts with staying engaged. Staying engaged. Oftentimes, difficult conversations of any sort make us want to withdraw and put up walls, just mental walls. We want to withdraw from the conversation. We want to just wish it would be over, and we stop participating. But here we want to try to stay engaged in the conversation, and don't leave me, all right? Don't mentally check out on me. Speak your truth. There will be opportunities for you all to populate the chat or take yourselves off mute and talk to me. I hope that you will, because this is not a class. I am not lecturing. This is not a keynote speech. This is meant to be interactive, okay? So speaking your truth means that you don't say just what you want others to say, what you think others want to hear. Speaking your truth means that you are showing up authentically and speaking honestly, all right? And you are coming from a place of authenticity and seeking to engage in the conversation, all right? Experience discomfort. I had a boss who actually my current boss, calls race the third rail. And any of you all who spent time in large cities or from large cities know that there's some type of, subway or in Chicago, where I'm from, there's the Metra rail system and commuter rail system. And then there's the third rail that they talk about. And that is, the third rail is hot. If you touch the third rail, you will be electrocuted. You will die, all right? You'll be maimed at the very least. And so my boss calls race, the conversation about race, the third rail. It's that thing you don't touch. But we're gonna touch it today and we're gonna survive. And we want you to be okay with the discomfort that it causes, okay? Just accept that it's an awkward conversation, that there is discomfort. I've been talking about race for years and I still experience discomfort around it, right? So accept that and be willing to sit with some discomfort, and then expect and accept non-closure. We aren't going to solve racism today. That's not even the goal. We aren't going to solve all the ways that there are to, we're not going to be able to unpack in 2 hours all the ways in which these frameworks work, and how to take a 4-hour workshop, a 2-day, 4-hour workshop over 2 days, distill it into 2 hours, and think that we're going to be experts on talking about race. So expect and accept non-closure. We want to balance showing up as experts and as learners, all right? So we have lots of experts in the room because you all have your lived experiences around race, and we all can be experts by sharing our lived experiences and speaking our truth about race and our own experiences with it. And then we all can show up as learners as well. When we're hearing from other experts in the room, we need to be willing to be learners and to hear from other people and learn from other people. Safe space versus brave space. I used to say in workshops around race that I create, this is a safe space. It's a safe space. But then I'd get feedback where people would tell me afterwards that, you know, they didn't feel safe. And so I realized that different people have different sensibilities and tolerances for this conversation. And so I can't really guarantee a safe space. And what I'm trying to create is a brave space. It's a space where you can say, hey, I'm feeling uncomfortable. Can we talk about that for a minute? Or if I call on you for some reason or point out something, you know, maybe I noticed your comment in the chat and I say, well, Pam, hey, do you want to unpack that for us? You absolutely have the right to say no. I don't want, you know, I'd prefer not to talk about it. It was just a comment I made in the chat, and that's fine. Be brave and say what you're feeling, all right? And if something is upsetting you or making you anxious or angry, again, experience the discomfort, but feel free if it helps you to state that. So this is a brave space. The devil doesn't need any more advocates. So I think that kind of speaks for itself, but this is a touchy topic. And it is easy when you are talking about race and people are speaking their truth and experiencing discomfort to feel a little edgy and want to play devil's advocate with someone's comment. But the devil doesn't need any more advocates. So we are going to agree to that and then follow the last agreement that we're allowing for growth and evolution and understanding. So rather than choose to be the devil's advocate, allow for your own growth and evolution and understanding, allow for growth and evolution and others' understanding, assume positive intent about others. Now I'm sharing my screen and I can't see everybody, but I'm assuming that we have entered into an oral agreement, oral agreements around these agreements for this conversation. And despite what you may have heard that oral agreements are not valid, are not legally valid, that is not the case. And under certain conditions, oral agreements are perfectly valid. And one of them, as I said earlier this month, is one of the conditions is if the agreement, the contract, can be performed in less than a year. And since we're going to perform it and fully execute these agreements in now less than 2 hours, since we've already started, I'm going to assume that we are in agreement and we can move forward with this. All right. If you were with me earlier this month, you also know that I do mindfulness first. Because we come into this conversation, there may already be some tenseness, some concern, some anxiety, some uneasiness. Some may be fully ready to embrace it and looking forward to it. I shared with Pam and Billy earlier this morning that when I finished an event last night.
You're on mute, Traci.
I don't know what happened. I just got a pop-up that said I was muted. So technology, I don't know where you lost me, but I did an event last night, and after the event was over, and there was a little virtual reception, so it was about 10 when the event was over, and I went to open up my PowerPoint and run through my slides, and they were all in code, just computer code. Basically everything was gone. My talking points, notes around it, it was all gone. So I called a friend who works in tech support. She tried to help me. I spent about a couple of hours, and finally at midnight, I threw my hands up and started over. And it was about 3 o'clock this morning when I finished. So I share that with you to say, talk about having some anxiety about a subject that I already speak a lot about, and I created the PowerPoint. So it came from my head and the resources that I use, but there's anxiety about the fact that, I had to start all over. So we are bringing, there could be lots of things that are causing us anxiety now that have nothing to do with this workshop, could have everything to do with this workshop, but I want to spend a couple of minutes doing a mindfulness exercise to get us maybe better prepared to engage this morning. So if you want to close your eyes, you can close your eyes. If you want to leave them open, you can leave them open. I can't see you. I can only see myself on the screen right now, so I'm not even looking at you. Stand up, sit down, whatever, get comfortable. That's the point. And so I want us to inhale deeply and hold it. Hold it. Exhale slowly. And as you exhale, you're releasing every distraction. Inhale deeply. Hold it. Exhale slowly. What are those distractions that are refusing to leave? Are you thinking about your to-do list, kids, your spouse, your parents, extended family, work, home, all of those thoughts? Inhale and exhale them out. Drop those shoulders. Release the tension. Let those shoulders fall, and then just do shoulder rolls. Slow shoulder rolls. Backwards. 2 more. And forward. 2 more. Inhale again deeply. And exhale. Our minds have a mind of their own, don't they? Our thoughts have a mind of their own. And as those thoughts that are distractions right now come in, let them in, but don't hold them. Don't own them. Let them pass right on through. And inhale. And exhale. Inhale. And exhale. Rhonda McGee tells us that there's a connection. She's a law professor who focuses on the intersection of mindfulness and justice in race, law, and politics. but she tells us that mindfulness helps us relax and prepare for conversations that are difficult. So just think about that a moment as we begin to engage in conversations you may find difficult. Roll your shoulders back a couple of more times. Roll them forward. One more deep inhale. Hold and exhale. All right. Let's come back together and be ready. Before I share my race story, I want to read to you what some Gerald Pine and Asa Hilliard say about talking about race. And they are scholars in critical race theory. And so one of the things that they've written is that discussions and debates about racism create anxiety and conflict, which are handled differently by different cultural groups. For example, whites tend to fear open discussion of racial problems because they believe that such discussion will stir up hard feelings and old hatreds. Whites tend to believe that heated arguments about racism lead to divisiveness, loss of control, bitter conflict, and even violence. Black people, on the other hand, believe often that discussions and debate about racism help to push racial problems to the surface and perhaps force society to deal with them. So those are generalizations, but based on race, based on research, okay? And so if you'll think about that for a moment, from a cultural standpoint, if we, from at least just from Black and white, we often come to these discussions from two different standpoints. One, again, white people feeling like talking about this stuff is divisive. And on the other hand, Black people feeling like, oh, we better talk about it. I want to talk, let's put it on the table and have an honest conversation and force society to deal with it. So you can see where those coming from those two, if you're white and you have thought that or are feeling that, if you're Black or a person of color and you think that it's better to talk about it and deal with, hopefully have society deal with these problems, you can see where there's room for a lot of anxiety and opportunities for discussion. So I want to share a bit about my race story. And I've spent a lifetime, right, understanding who I am from a racial perspective. I have lots of stories about who I am. There are the stories that this country have often told me that aren't true. And there are stories that my lived experiences have told me and stories that have been handed down. And so I come to the development of my race story across a lifetime, but but there's some new and really significant information that I've only learned since 2019. All right, so I'll share this with you. First of all, in the summer of 2019, I decided, after thinking about it and putting it off for several years, decided to get my DNA test. And so these are the results. And I don't know if you noticed, but let's see, England, Wales, and Northwestern Europe, 20%. Ireland and Scotland, 4%, Sweden, 4%, and Germanic Europe, 1%. That's 20%, 24%, 28%, 29%, 29% white. I was shocked. 27%, 24%, lost my cursor there. 19% Mali, 1% Ivory Coast and Ghana, right? So what is that? 29% white and white heritage, and 71% Black, African, 71% African, all right? So that was shocking to me. And it was shocking to me that it was 29%. I knew if you saw pictures of my paternal grandmother, there was no way that there was not white in my family. I was really clear about that because of her skin tone and her hair texture. It was very clear, but I was shocked at the amount. And it just so happened about the time that I got these results, I also got a letter in the mail from a museum in Kentucky, Russellville, Kentucky, called the SEEK Museum. And SEEK is an acronym for Seeking Equality and Education in Kentucky or something like that. And it was from the executive director inviting me, explaining that I was believed to be a descendant of Major Richard Bibb, and who was the owner of a major plantation in Russellville, Kentucky, and that there was a reunion coming up in August of 2019, inviting the descendants of the people who had been enslaved on the Richard Bibb plantation and the descendants of Richard Bibb. So the descendants of the enslaved and the descendants of the enslavers. Now, initially, my initial thought was, because anxiety, I was like, there is no way I'm going to that reunion. Like, there's just no way. There's nothing good that's going to come out of that. I am not interested. I'm not interested in doing this. But about a week later, I got a call from the executive director saying, hey, I want to follow up. Did you get the invite? And I said, I did. And I don't know how you got my name and all of that. But, and yes, my grandmother's, my paternal grandmother's maiden name was Bibb. But I don't think I'm interested in doing this. And here's why. I don't know what to expect. I don't think that I'm ready, even with all the work I do in this area. I just don't think I'm ready to deal with this. But over the course of several weeks and with some other family members and talking with the folks from Russellville, Kentucky and the SEEK Museum, I had a change of heart. And so I went, and my sister and I went, and she took her kids and I brought my young grandchildren. And I have two sons, and the older one didn't come, the father of my grandkids, but the younger son, who's an adult, came with us as well. And so off to Russellville, Kentucky, we went. And I want to step back from Russellville, Kentucky for just a second, and I'll come back to that. But my paternal great-grandmother, my father's grandmother, her race story, what you're looking at here, and I realize these are bad copies, but they're bad copies because of they're copies of copies. These are freedom papers. These are the freedom papers that released my great-grandmother from enslavement in Georgia. And they, again, if you had the copy that I have, and it's difficult to read, but you would see that on the second page, it talks about Pascal Hickman being, and he's named a white man, and it says he's married, he is married to Fannie Hickman. who is a Negro woman, is what it says, and that they have 7 children. And it's granting freedom to Fannie Hickman and her 7 children from enslavement. Now, obviously, we assume that Pascal probably owned enslaved Fannie and fathered her 7 children, and at some point they got married, which would have been illegal then, but he secured her freedom from enslavement. So this third page is the family tree that Pascal and Fannie Hickman had these children. From one of their children, Grove married Margaret, and from Margaret, Grove and Margaret had a son named Pascal, and Pascal had children, Minnie and Maggie. Minnie was my father's grandmother, my great-grandmother. All right. So that's a little bit about my paternal great-grandmother's race story. We know that her grandmother, great-great-grandmother, I think, was enslaved and freed, married to a white man and freed. So let's go back to Russellville, Kentucky. That was my paternal, the previous slides were about my paternal great-grandmother's race story. This is my paternal great-grandfather's race story. And I told you that this reunion took place on the plantation of Major Richard Bibb. And this picture on the left is John Bigger Bibb, Richard's son. And this picture is my great-grandfather, my father's grandfather, Charlie Bibb. Do you see any resemblance there? Right? John Bigger Bibb raped Pocahontas. Her name is Pocahontas. And from that union, they had a son, and that son had a son and some other kids, but Charlie Bibb was my great-grandfather. Have any of you ever heard of Bibb lettuce? If you've ever heard of Bibb lettuce before, it's a type of lettuce. That is, that lettuce was grown on the Bigger plantation. So, and made the Bigger family a lot of money, made them extremely wealthy. There were other crops grown as well, but Bigger lettuce was the Bibb lettuce. This is John Bigger Bibb, but Bibb lettuce was a central source of their wealth. The purpose of me sharing, and the reason that I've spent a lot of time trying to discover my own race story, is because when it comes to talking about race, often about different topics, we say, hey, it's not personal, it's business. But when it comes to talking about race, I think the opposite is true. It's not business, it's personal. It's personal. And I think that we all should seek to discover our own race stories. Now, for white people, I've always been struck that, frequently, oh, my grandparents were German. My maternal grandmother came from, Eastern Europe. My paternal grandfather came from Northern Europe. They met here and they married. You can go back a ways oftentimes and know a lot about your own race story. For Black folks, it's not as simple because enslavement disrupted our race story. And so piecing it back together, frequently, we have to rely on DNA tests and Ancestry.com, or what is the other one? 123andMe or something like that, 23andMe. Are some ways of doing that. There is a company out there that I intend to use that focuses specifically on Black people's DNA and can drill down more into those African countries and get to supposedly which villages within those African countries that you likely come from, and tie it to tribes and whatnot, so that we can begin to learn more. But basically, without doing a lot of that work, it's very difficult to piece together our race story. But it is a personal journey. And coming into talking about race, I don't mean that you all have to go, I've learned what I've learned, the same amount of information and whatnot, but you all need to reflect and be curious about what your race story is, because it informs how you view race and how you've lived, informs your lived experiences. And when you're doing this personal reflection, there are some questions that I want you to think about. Starting with, what is your race story? We just talked about that. What is it? Where do you come from? Who are your people? How does that inform how you view the world? What are the lived experiences you have as a result of your race? What does BIPOC mean? What is racism? How does it manifest against people of color? What do you believe about racism? What do you believe about the value of colorblindness? One question that's not on here, but what do you believe about the value of color celebration? What is color celebration? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Helpful or no? What is institutional racism? What is systemic racism? What is structural racism? How does 300 years of the enslavement of Black people and then another 150 or so years of Jim Crow, Black codes, convict leasing impact society today? What is the history of policing in this country? How did policing begin? Do you know? What were the first police forces put together for? For what purpose? What is police brutality? What is Black Lives Matter about? Why is Blue Lives Matter, I see the typo there, so offensive to Black people? Is the system of policing today broken? How? If not, why do you believe that? Hint right there, it's not broken. It's operating exactly as it was intended to. What is tone policing? What does centering the voices of marginalized people mean? How does that make you feel? The idea of centering the voices of marginalized people in a conversation about race. How do you avoid using people of color? This is directed at non-people of color. How do you avoid using people of color to absolve you of guilt, explain racism, process your feelings? And why is it important that you do so? What current social or political issues do white people generally believe are not about race, but actually may be? What is white privilege? If you're white, have you examined yours? People of color, how have you experienced it? How have you experienced white privilege? What is intersectionality and how does it inform discussions about race? What are microaggressions? Have you read any books on race and racism by Black and other authors of color? If not, why? Have you or do you dismiss conversations about race or racism because they don't make sense to you? What is the school to prison pipeline? Why can't you touch Black people's hair? Why can't you say the N-word? It's ubiquitous in society now. It's in a lot of rap songs. Why can't you say it? Those are some of the reflections, the questions that you want to wrestle with as you take a personal journey. This work is personal. And before you're ready to go engage other people about race, like in your organizations and in your communities, you really have to do this personal work to get comfortable with it yourself. As part of this journey, you have to be willing to challenge your core belief systems about the world and how it works when it comes to race. Examine your own past experiences with race and racism. We talked about being willing to be uncomfortable, experiencing discomfort as you seek to grow and learn. If you aren't uncomfortable, particularly white people, and I say that because people of color and especially Black people tend to be more comfortable talking about race because it's a thing for us every single day of our lives. But for those of you who don't have to really think about race every day because you don't experience your racialized self regularly, you may be uncomfortable as you're taking this journey. You will be uncomfortable as you're taking this journey, and be willing to do that. Don't substitute diversity for race. When we're talking about having courageous conversations about race, I'm not talking about having courageous conversations about diversity. They're not the same conversations. And diversity is not a substitute for race. Understand that racism isn't binary. If you've read White Fragility by Dr. Robin DiAngelo, you understand that. If you are a person of color, particularly a Black person, and relatively conscious, you already knew that. It is not about good white people and bad white people. It is not a binary. As you're on this journey, examine your own fragility around talking about race and racism. Avoid feelings of guilt. That is absolutely not what this work is about. Guilt is pointless. It's useless. It doesn't move the conversation forward, nor does it resolve anything. So avoid feelings of guilt, because no one is looking at you. And because I know two people's names here, Pam and Billy, it's not about looking at Pam or Billy and saying, you did this, you're racist. That is not what this is about. This is not about your guilt. And if you're feeling any, release it, unless you're actively engaged in racism, in which case you use that guilt to stop it. But I'm assuming that's not what's happening. So avoid feelings of guilt. And then be curious. There's so much. I don't care how much you know, there's so much you don't know, including me. I'm still learning every day. And I'm still every day, and I believe it will be a lifelong journey, unpacking internalized racism. And I think that's an important point to make, because Black people and people of color are socialized in this country just like white people. And we learn the same subliminal messages about negative messages and stereotypes and tropes about Black people and other people of color that white people learn. We don't have an exemption from the messaging we pick up. And if you were with me earlier this month, then you heard some of that messaging. You saw some of the media, how the media depicts Black people. We aren't exempt from just in our everyday lives absorbing those messages. And so I'm on and have been on for many, many years and I'm continuing on, and again, believe it will be a lifelong journey of unpacking my own internalized racism. So then when white people come and quote to me and say, yeah, but what about, Candace Owens is Black and she said X, Y, Z. Listen, go ask Candace why she said that. If you don't know who Candace Owens is, she espouses a lot of racist things about Black people. So, and gets paid well for it. And so my take on that is there are some of us that are further along in unpacking and dismantling our internal racism than others. Just like there are some white people who are further along in this conversation and in this work. We're all on this journey. Candace Owens is still working her stuff out. All right. Also, when you're thinking about race, because a lot of times I've heard and people have shared when, in the spirit of speaking their truth and in these conversations, usually it's an accusation that Black people, as opposed to people of color in general, Black people make everything about race. And Ijeoma Oluo, who's the author of a book that I recommend you read, So You Want to Talk About Race, has some very simple rules about, is it really, whatever it is, the X is it really about race? So her very simple rules are, it's about race if a person of color thinks it's about race. It is about race if it disproportionately or differently affects people of color. It is about race if it fits into a broader pattern of events that disproportionately or differently affect people of color. Okay. So when you're thinking about these conversations and are about to either intentionally enter into a conversation about race, or these oftentimes are more likely to happen spontaneously, if you're thinking, why is she making, or why is he making this about race? Keep these very simple rules in mind. So there are two frameworks that I'm going to talk about today at a very high level to help us engage, learn how to engage in conversations about race. One of them is Crucial Conversations, and it doesn't have anything to do with conversations about race, nothing at all. It's about having crucial conversations about topics that are high stakes. And so race and racism fall into that. So it is a useful framework. There are areas where I have found that the framework is not so helpful, and I'll try to point those out. But overall, it is a useful framework with a couple of caveats that we just need to understand. And then I also use Glenn Singleton's Courageous Conversations About Race. All right. So those are two of the frameworks that we'll rely on. So Crucial Conversations. You know what? Let me stop here for a second. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I want to come back, and because I said that this is not a keynote and this is interactive. So I want to take a look at the chat, and I also want to give you all an opportunity to talk about what you've heard so far, ask any questions. I'm looking at substituting diversity for race and substituting inclusion for equity are both efforts of sidestepping the issues and avoiding real change. Agreed, Michael, I agree, I agree. Crucial Conversations is amazing. Yes, I went through a training session on that, and I thought it was amazing as well. Again, in practice, I have found that it is a little tougher to really follow the framework in conversations about race, but it's still generally useful. Any webinars like this for middle school, high school age kids? I think so. As a matter of fact, I'm positive, and I can't name one now. And so I'll try to find that and send it to Pam and Billy and see if they can share it with you guys if I come up with that. All right. I mentioned it earlier, it'd be amazing to have Middle Easterners included in your categories. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. So that's why I try to use, I've named some people of color, but to avoid leaving people of color out, I also try to use people of color, the acronym, it's not an acronym, but try to use the phrase people of color so that I'm inclusive and point it out for everyone. And include all people of color. So thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that. We experience a ton of racism and don't get included as Asian. I think I had Asian listed in one of the lines that I listed, but I agree that Asians often get left out because one of the stereotypical tropes about Asians is they're the model minority. They don't experience racism, they're the model minority. We know that that's not true. Those of us who've done the work know that that's not true. And if you've been paying attention to the news lately and heard about the shootings in Atlanta, then you too know that that is not true, okay? So we definitely want to be inclusive. And there are times when I will speak about the Black experience because that is the experience I know personally and can speak with some authenticity and from an expert level about, because I've been Black for a long time. Despite the fact that I'm 29% white, I've been Black. I have lived 100% Black my entire life. And so, you know, so I will often point out things about Black people. That is not to exclude other people of color. It is to say that in this moment, I welcome you to share your experiences. I just can't speak on them with the same level of expertise and authenticity that I can as I can about the Black experience. Can you talk a little? Oh, it's jumping. Can you talk a little about your understanding of the difference between race and racism? Do you differentiate? Well, race is that set of characteristics. You know, it's a social construct. I think that's later in some of my slides, but race is a social construct, and it describes a set of characteristics that generally describe people. So Black people, although we come in so many shades, we tend to have more melanin in our skin, right? Our hair texture comes in so many textures, but there tend to be some distinguishing features around our hair texture. It tends to be a bit coarser, a bit curlier, tighter coils. Again, some generalizations because it's a social construct, right? But a social construct, however, it has been codified in this country, and although not based in science, this whole system, our whole American system, and really many systems in the world have been constructed around race, right? Racism then is and we'll also get into definitions about racism, but generally speaking, it is the definition that I use is that it is prejudice against a particular race plus institutional power to negatively impact that race. It's prejudice plus power, and we'll delve a little bit into that. All right, someone gave an example, I think, for middle school and high school. Project Ready is excellent for teachers, reimagining equity and access for diverse youth. I don't know if that was, yeah, resources for youth. So someone's acknowledged that. And you're welcome. I see Amy thanking me for sharing my personal story. I encourage you all to try to delve into your own race story again. All right, so I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen. Okay, so high level, this crucial conversations framework, and I see some of y'all have been through it, but crucial conversations they are a discussion. It's a discussion between two or more people where one, the stakes are high, two, opinions vary, three, emotions run strong, and four, the outcome greatly impacts their lives, the participants' lives. So you can imagine how race then easily fits into the definition of a crucial conversation. You've got opposing opinions, strong emotions, and high stakes. And when you either are about to voluntarily engage in a crucial conversation or find yourself in one involuntarily, there are a couple of responses. You can avoid them, face them and handle it poorly, or face them and handle it well. Obviously, we want to face them and handle them well. Because the stakes are high and emotions are running strong and the opinions about these crucial conversations, and certainly with respect to race, are so strong, the opinions, so many varying opinions around race and racism, the responses often come in the form of threats and name calling, silent fuming, or speaking openly, honestly, and effectively. Obviously, if you spend any time on social media, you can see how number one happens frequently, threats and name calling, right? Social media is a hot mess for trying to have effective conversation, crucial conversations about race. Silent fuming. Have you ever been in a room where the conversation came up and someone got angry and they don't say anything, they're not verbally threatening anybody or calling names, but they're sitting over there in the corner, arms folded, closed off, disengaged, and fuming, right? Have you seen that before? And then we can choose, because we have those agreements from the very beginning, we can choose to speak openly, honestly, and effectively about race, or in any crucial conversation, but today we're talking about race. How do you spot a crucial conversation? Let's just say that, sometimes I have in my professional life called someone up or sent an email saying, hey, I'd like to have a crucial conversation with you. When's a good time? So sometimes they're scheduled and they're known in advance, and I'm setting it up as a crucial conversation. Usually, though, a lot of times, I won't say usually, a lot of times we just find ourselves in these conversations. And how do you spot a crucial conversation, any crucial conversation? Well, there are physical signs: sweaty hands, dry mouth, butterflies in your stomach, rapid heart rate, anxiety, right? If there are physical manifestations of stress and anxiety, you might just be in a crucial conversation. If you're feeling strong emotions, anger, hurt, fear, good signs that you're in a crucial conversation. And then behavioral, raising your voice, or raising voices, might not be yours, but somebody's raising their voice, pointing fingers, becoming silent. I had maybe a couple of months ago was in a Zoom, a crucial conversation with a group of people on Zoom, and the race dynamics are important because there were 3 white men and 1 white woman, and 2 Black women. I was one of them on this Zoom call. So 4 white people, 2 Black people. And one of the white men was trying to explain and was doing a great job trying to explain the situation and some of the factors involved and the need to come together and talk about this. And whenever he said something, the 2 other white men would not in agreement, or at least if they didn't agree, they were respectful in their disagreement. Whenever I said something or the other Black woman said something, they would just lose it. And we could be saying darn near the same thing that the one white guy was saying. But when I say they would lose it, I mean leaning into the screen, face red, pointing their finger, like virtually in my face or in in the other Black woman's face. And it was so obvious that the one white guy called it out and said, "What is going on here?" And the other white people got silent, fuming, that silent fuming. We were in a crucial conversation. All the things here were present because I had a rapid heart rate and butterflies, a lot of anxiety because of what was happening. And my anxiety was not around, oh, I don't know what to do. My anxiety was around me not losing it too and matching that energy and working really hard to stay calm in the face of some pretty significant aggression. There were emotions. Clearly the people on the other side, those 2 white men, were angry. I don't know what else, but they clearly were angry. I don't know if they were hurt or afraid or what they were feeling, but other than anger, that was the palpable emotion. And because they were raising their voice, literally screaming and pointing their fingers, there were those behavioral indices as well. And then after they were called out on it, sat in silent fuming, okay? We were clearly in a crucial conversation. In these conversations though, you want to, if you find yourself pulled into one, it's okay to step back, collect yourself, ask for a moment. But if you have time to know you're coming into one, particularly around race, Crucial Conversations training tells us to start with the heart and to be sure that you have dialogue goals in mind, not protective goals. Protective goals are the goals where you want to save face, avoid embarrassment. You want to win. You want to be right. And you want to punish others. And if we're honest, if we're really honest, I think we can all say at some point or another, we've been in a crucial conversation where we've had protective goals in mind. But when you know better, you do better, right? So in crucial conversations about race, you want to start with dialogue goals. If you know you're coming into this conversation, you all knew you were coming in, you're not shocked that you were coming into a conversation today about race. And if you are shocked, I'm shocked at how that is. Maybe you, I don't know how that could be. But at any rate, I assume that everyone knew they were going to come into a conversation about race today. And so one of the things, if that was causing you any anxiety or, not enough to keep you out, but to keep you from coming in today, but just like, ugh, how's this gonna go? How am I gonna feel? What is she gonna say? Is she gonna make me feel guilty? Is she gonna be accusatory? What's gonna happen? All right, all of that might lead you into protective goals. But if you thought about it and said, regardless of what happens today or what she says, I have dialogue goals in mind. What do I really want for myself from this conversation? What do I really want for others? What do I really want for the relationship? And how would I behave if I really wanted those results? So because I do this work daily, it's my it's my primary job to talk about race as the Chief Equity Officer. It's to infuse equity, systems change work, and really break our systems and put them back together with equity embedded. And part of that work is talking about racial equity, because in my sector, in education, racial inequities in education are prevalent. And so you can't really talk about equity without dealing with racial inequities, all right? So I have to practice this myself. One of the things is that I lead the senior leadership team, which is made up of the president, his direct reports, the executive team of which I'm one, called it the president's cabinet, and then the senior leaders who are the directors, various levels of directors in the organization. And we are doing a book read together, a series of books that we're reading together and using our senior leadership meeting time to have deep conversations about these books. So we read White Fragility by Dr. Robin DiAngelo together. Right now we're reading Dr. Ibram Kendi's book, Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. It's a tough book, and it's hard to talk about the book without having crucial conversation about America's racial history, right? And in order for me to go into that conversation, which is stress inducing, because a lot of people haven't done this personal work, right? And so they're coming into it, it's kind of like, people are just bumping, we're in a crowded space and people are just bumping into each other, although it's happening on Zoom, right? And sometimes the conversations get awkward because somebody will say something that is really racist. But in the spirit of speak your truth, and then in the spirit of be willing to experience discomfort, sometimes when people say racist things, I'll get a text from a person of color in the room. Are you going to call that out? Yeah, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. We all have to experience discomfort. We're all asking each other to speak our truth. And depending on, where the person is coming from and how regularly they're engaged in saying racist things, or there are lots of factors as to whether or not I call it out and use it as not call it out in an accusatory or, finger pointing way, but call it out as, hey, that's concerning to me. It has some racial undertones. It sounds racist, and here's why. And it allows for, again, hopefully more conversation. But you go into this, I have to really work this myself. What do I want for myself? I want for myself to be heard, to be understood, and to do my job as Chief Equity Officer in a highly competent and effective way. What do I really want for others in these conversations about race? I want for others to learn, grow, evolve, and be willing and more open to engage in racial equity work, in equity work in general, particularly racial equity work. What do I want for the relationship with the senior leaders in my organization? As an executive leader in my organization, I want to leave these conversations still in relationship with the senior leaders in my organization. The goal is not to tick everybody off and lose trust. I want for the relationship, a trusting relationship, and to create brave spaces where people can come together, wrestle with these issues, break apart, go back into our regular whirlwind of the workday, wrestling with these issues, thinking about them, come back together, wrestle some more, but maintain an effective working relationship built on trust and mutual respect. How then will I behave if I really want those results? If those are what I say I want, and those are what I tell myself I want, then how will I behave in these conversations if I really want those results? So when a white person in those conversations says something super racist, if I want the results that I just described for you, I am not going to move into where I might naturally go to protective goals. Oh, I'm about to nail this person. I'm about to inflict punishment. I'm coming for you. I'm gonna be right. I wanna win this. You're not gonna embarrass me, but I'm gonna embarrass you. Those are not effective, but we do them because they're natural. These other things, the dialogue goals, take work and effort. And so once you decide, what do you want for yourself? What do you want for others? And what do you want for the relationship with the people that you're about to engage in these conversations with? Once you identify those things, then how would you behave if you really want those results? And if what you really want, because I have been in some conversations, be honest, if what you really want is to nail somebody, then own that. And then you'll behave as if you really want the results, then you get what you get. And sometimes, you know, in different contexts, I've had to have those conversations where I'm coming for you and I'm okay with the chips landing. I'm okay that you just blocked me on Facebook. What do I care? Okay. But 99% of the time, that's not the case. All right. Key questions. If you want to have an authentic relationship, build trust, be effective, and get results around conversations about race, how would you behave in those conversations if you really wanted that? Oftentimes in these crucial conversations, because they are so fraught, so tense, fraught with these high emotions, strong opinions, we naturally resort to those protective goals and we engage in some pretty non-productive behavior. And maybe you've seen this in conversations about race or other conversations in your personal life or at work, but silence, that is a weapon. We purposefully withhold information from the conversation. We purposefully aren't engaging in the conversation. We purposefully aren't sharing our thoughts because you're mad. You don't like it. You're silently fuming. We mask where we understate or selectively show what we think. Sometimes it can be, it can come in the form of just not authentically speaking your truth. And it's not harmful to the group, but it's harmful to you because you haven't been honest about how you really feel. A lot of times it can come in the negative of sarcasm, sugarcoating, couching, right? Avoiding, where we're not addressing the real issues. Have you ever been in a conversation where people are deflecting, changing the subject? I have a 3-year-old grandson who did something. He was at my home last weekend, and I said, Christian, that was not nice. Why did you hit your brother? He's got an 8-year-old brother. I have an 8-year-old grandson. And he hit him, and he actually bit him as well. Why did you hit Cameron? Why did you bite Cameron? And he looked at me with these beautiful big eyes and said, but Gracie, because my grandkids call me Gracie because I didn't want to be called grandma or anything. So Gracie stands for Grandma Tracy, Gracie. But he looked at me with these big, beautiful eyes and he said, but Gracie, I love you so much. And I'm like, nope. Deflecting, little boy, that's deflecting. You're 3. I don't know how you know how to do that already, but let's stay on the subject of you hitting your brother. Have you seen adults doing that? Not addressing the real issues that we're here to talk about, but changing the subject and deflecting. So one of the tools of deflecting around race is when we're talking about racism and talking about white privilege and talking about institutional racism or talking about any area about racism, We often hear, I have often heard, particularly it comes up with police brutality, and we're talking about the unjustified killings of unarmed Black people. And I hear, what about Black on Black crime? Whoops, I just knocked something over. That is platinum level deflecting, platinum level changing of the subject. And I'm happy to have a conversation about Black on Black crime. We want to talk about it. By the way, it's not a thing. That should have been one of the reflection questions. What do you think about Black on Black crime? Let me help you. It's not a thing. People commit crime where they live. You just don't ever hear. So white people commit crime where they live. They commit crime in white neighborhoods, just that society hasn't called it anything and made something of it. You don't hear about white on white crime. Crime happens everywhere, but we've stigmatized crime in Black communities against each other when the same thing happens in other communities, every community. All right. That is just deflecting, withdrawing, not engaging in the conversation any longer, exiting the conversation or the room altogether, either physically, mentally, right? Violence, convincing, controlling, compelling others to your viewpoint, not allowing others to talk, cutting people off, making people, I'm gonna make you believe me, and I'm not gonna stop talking until you relent and acquiesce. Controlling, coercing others, cutting them off, overstating your fact, speaking in absolutes, dominating the conversation, labeling, stereotyping or categorizing people, name calling or generalizing, and then attacking, belittling, or threatening others. All of these obviously don't happen in all conversations about race. This is a spectrum, right? And it can go from silence or masking all the way to violence and attacking. And I don't really necessarily mean physical violence. So how to make it safe to talk about anything? You want to find a mutual purpose where you can. And mutual purpose means that others perceive that we are working toward a common outcome in the conversation, that we care about their goals, interests, and values, and vice versa. We believe they care about ours. So if we have this, if we are honestly working toward a common outcome, and we honestly care about each other's goals and interests and values, then how will we behave if those things are true? We will avoid defensiveness and hidden agendas and accusations and repeating the same topic multiple times. We'll avoid silence and violence and retreating. And we'll ask ourselves, maybe we'll ask the other, we'll ask out loud, but we certainly will ask ourselves, do others believe I care about their goals in this conversation, and do they trust my motives? Now, this is one of the caveats where I found that it's really difficult in relationships about race. And this is where I'll focus on Black people because I certainly can't speak for how other people of color experience these conversations about race. I have some anecdotal data, but I don't have enough information for me to say. I have thoughts about it and what I've experienced or seen, but I'll tell you, because I know most about how Black folks do it. And again, we're not a monolith, but certainly there are some, I've been Black a long time. And so I have an opportunity to witness this and experience it myself. It is hard. It is very hard oftentimes, particularly in the work environment, for Black people to trust white people's motives around these conversations. And so this is a caveat where it says how to make it safe to talk about anything. It's difficult when it comes to race. It is really difficult because we have a 400-year history about race and racism in this country. And it has left Black people feeling less than warm and fuzzies and trusting of white people's motives. Frequently, even You know, Dr. King in his letter from a Birmingham jail talked about the good white moderates are more problematic than the KKK because we expect the KKK to be the KKK. We expect, back then he talked about the white counselor, some organization that was like a white supremacist organization. Today we might substitute, you know, white supremacists, the Boogaloo Boys, the Proud Boys, the KKK is still alive and well. We expect white supremacists to be white supremacists, right? They're not as shocking to us because they are behaving just as they were constructed to do. Where it gets dicey is with what Dr. King called good white moderates. And in our terms, I'll say oftentimes I find white liberals, white progressives can think that they are being helpful, but oftentimes are not. And I think it's because they haven't done a lot of personal work yet, and it shows because they jump into these conversations with what they think are good intentions, and they kind of move around like a bull in a china shop. And, you know, Black folks are just like, woo. So that's where it gets a little dicey, because if you jump into these conversations unprepared and not having done, race and racism require a level of personal work before engaging in deep conversations, unlike most other topics, particularly in the workplace. I mean, rarely are we that emotional about, do we have this type of history around, you know, that finance report, or how the marketing department executed on something, or how the program manager really made me mad and didn't, you know, my director didn't do what I wanted done, or whatever the case may be. But trusting motives, and also because Black people are exhausted in talking about this stuff, we're exhausted. And oftentimes we are used to teach white people about race and racism when a lot of the questions that we get are, quite frankly, lazy. You could Google it, you could go read, tomes have been written about this stuff. And so to constantly go to Black people and ask these questions can be exhausting. And so sometimes we don't trust motives. And then when we do and we enter into the conversation, we get met with microaggressions. You know, what about Black on Black crime? Or you're just being sensitive, or that's not about race. You're making everything about race. Or white people will cry, which is a way to weaponize tears. Because now you've asked me something about racism, or you've asked me about a situation that you and I have had that has racial undertones. And I'm explaining to you why this was racist, why it was harmful to me, and you start crying. Now you've shifted the conversation from me as the victim of whatever it is we're talking about with respect to race and racism, to you as the victim. And it makes it hard to trust. So this is where I say there are caveats. This is one of the caveats in the Crucial Conversations framework. Overall, I generally think that it's a good framework, but I did want to mention that, all right? Also, a word of caution. And this is really for people of color. These conversations, as I just said, are hard for us. They're hard for white people, but they're really hard for us because they're part of our daily experiences, especially Black folks. You have a right to not engage. Sometimes you cannot engage in these conversations, and it is perfectly okay. You have a right to step away. You have a right to be safe and protect yourself. I just want to put that out there because a lot of times, you know, I've heard people of color disengage, even though we say stay engaged. Sometimes they've had to disengage if the conversation is getting too hostile. I don't know if any of you all saw the clip from The Talk. Is that the name of the talk? I don't watch it, but with Sharon Osbourne and I can't think of her name, the Black actress. But anyway, Sharon Osbourne was really off the deep end and crying. She's crying while telling the Black woman, don't you cry. You don't have a right to cry. But they're talking about Piers Morgan's racist comments around Meghan Markle in that interview with Oprah Winfrey. Anyway, if you haven't seen it, go Google it. It's a classic example of where that conversation of the Black woman, whose name is escaping me right now, she did a remarkable job of remaining calm, cool, and collected under Sharon Osbourne's just outrageous conduct in that film clip, in that clip of the show. But she would have been perfectly justified to cut the conversation off because it was abusive, it was harmful, and it was full of microaggressions. So I just want to say to people of color, there's always that caveat, all right? Okay, so that was crucial conversations, and courageous conversations. They're designed to engage those who won't talk. They're designed. Courageous conversations framework is designed to engage those who don't want to talk about this, who are unwilling to talk about it. It sustains the conversation when it gets uncomfortable and deepens the conversation to the point where authentic understanding and meaningful actions occur. I want to remind you of the 4 agreements. They were part of the 7 or 8 agreements that I laid out at the outset, but stay engaged, speak your truth, be willing to be uncomfortable, and expect and accept non-closure. In the Crucial Conversations framework, there are those 4 agreements. There are also 6 conditions. They are, unlike the 4 agreements, which you can say in any order, the 6 conditions are specifically ordered and they are sequential. The first and second conditions are designed to engage us in a conversation about race and provide a way to kind of stick your toe in the water to determine how ready are we to dialogue with others. It's testing the water. The third and fourth conditions then sustain the conversation and help us to keep it moving forward and to engage in multiple perspectives, beliefs, and experiences different from our own. And then the final 2, the 5th and 6th conditions, then deepen our dialogues about race, interracial dialogues about race. Again, I think it's an important point. It maybe seems obvious, but it's important to point out. We're talking about courageous conversations, interracial dialogues about race, by guiding us into the most and least examined issues of how we understand race. So let's look at those 6 conditions. Establish a racial context that is personal, local, and immediate. Bring your race story, all of your race story, and what you know, your personal race story, to bear, and what you know about the issue that you're going to be talking about if it's not the big, huge Mack truck wide race. But generally, we're talking about some specific issues in the context of race and our workplaces, race and our communities, their local and their immediate issues. Isolate race. Call a thing a thing. Do not deflect. Don't try to mix in diversity and inclusion or class or other things. Call a thing a thing. Isolate race while being willing to acknowledge the broader scope of diversity, and there are other factors that can contribute to a racialized problem. Class certainly contributes to a racialized problem, but when we're going to have courageous conversations about race, we're going to call a thing and be willing to deal with isolating race. Develop an understanding of race as a social and political construct, and then engage multiple racial perspectives to surface critical understanding. White people, you cannot just talk to white people about race. And I would encourage you not to just talk to Black people about race, because other people of color experience racism, race and racism in similar and different ways, and to get a full understanding and be prepared to engage in these conversations from a place of and I'll use the word ignorance, but I don't mean it in the negative connotation. I just mean ignorance in the lack of knowing anything. Engage multiple racial perspectives so that you get a critical understanding of how race and racism work in this country. Then monitor the parameters of the conversation. If you're going to, as opposed to finding yourself in one accidentally or off the, on the spur, as opposed to you've set it up, we are going to have a conversation. You want to create parameters that can help the conversation to be successful. So be explicit about the number of people that can participate in this. Have prompts ready for discussion. Allot time for listening, speaking, and reflecting. Establish agreement around a contemporary working definition of race that is clearly differentiated from ethnicity and nationality. Again, we are isolating race. You cannot have a courageous conversation about race if you infuse it and bury it with all sorts of, as many other issues as you can think of to keep from talking about race. Examine the presence and role of whiteness and its impact on the conversation and problem being discussed. Examine the presence and role of whiteness. And that could be one of those reflections. It's not on the reflection slides. There's a couple of slides where I talked about your personal journey and things to think about. But be willing to examine the role of whiteness. What is whiteness? Do you understand it? And its impact on the conversation and problem being discussed. And then, so we've got the agreements, the conditions, and then the courageous conversation compass. And the compass helps us to know where we are personally, as well as recognizing where others are in this conversation. And together, it can help us have a mutual understanding of our different beliefs and opinions, and help us locate the sources of our emotions and actions, or the lack thereof. And there are 4 primary ways that people deal with race: racial information, events, and information. Emotionally, intellectually, morally, and relationally. And depending on who's in the room and who you're having conversations with, any one or all 4 of those could be operating at different levels. Okay. So one of the things that's important for us is to have some common language around race. In my organization, we've defined race and racism. There are multiple. I encourage you where you can with the group to proffer a definition of race and maybe seek some input into that. But I don't want to be starting with, I think race means this, and someone else has a completely, 180-degree opposite view of it, all right? So a definition around race that I use and is a socially constructed meaning attached to a variety of physical attributes, such as skin color and hair texture, because we know that biologically there is no difference. But socially, there's a world of differences, all right? And it's those socially constructed and politically constructed physical attributes that make up the definition of race. How do you define racism? How do others define racism? Pine and Hilliard, I referred to those critical race scholars a little bit ago, describe racism this way: is the combination of individual prejudice and individual discrimination on the one hand, and institutional policies and practices on the other that result in the unjustified negative treatment and subordination of members of a racial or ethnic group. By convention, the term has been reserved to describe the mistreatment of members of racial and ethnic groups that have experienced a history of discrimination. Prejudice, discrimination, and racism do not require intention. It is not intention, it is impact. all right? Another definition of racism, it's the systematic mistreatment of certain groups of people, often referred to as people of color, on the basis of skin color or other physical characteristics. This mistreatment is carried out by societal institutions or by people who have been conditioned by the society to act consciously or unconsciously in harmful ways towards people of color. Racism is different than prejudice. The difference is that in this country, people of color face systematic and ongoing personal and institutionalized biases every day. Another critical race scholar, Weisglass. Racism is so universal in this country, so widespread and deep-seated, that it is invisible because it is so normal. Think about that. That was Shirley Chisholm, the first Black Congresswoman in the United States. So universal, so widespread, so deep-seated, it's invisible because it is so normal. Another race scholar, the belief that race accounts for differences in human character or ability and that a particular race is superior to others. Discrimination or prejudice based on race. Those first two came from, at that time, the American Heritage Dictionary definition. Katz added prejudice plus power. Here's the definition of racism: prejudice plus power. Other race scholars have zeroed in on this racial prejudice plus institutional power. Certainly any individual can perpetrate acts of racial prejudice towards another individual. Thus, Black people as individuals can be racially prejudiced against white people. Asians can be racially prejudiced against Native Americans, and so on. But Black, Brown, Asian, Native Americans, all the peoples of color, individually or collectively, do not have the social, political, or economic power in the US, not UD, US, to alter the collective racial experience of white Americans. So no matter how much racial prejudice individual Black Americans or other people of color might project towards white Americans, they cannot be said to be practicing institutional racism unless they are actively supporting the maintenance of racial power for white people. That really gets to Dr. Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be Anti-Racist, where he says there is no not racist. You're either acting in racist or anti-racist ways. And so to the extent that Black people or people of color are practicing institutional racism and actively supporting the maintenance of racial power for white people, they are acting in racist ways. Cue Candace Owens as a Black person, acting in very racist ways towards Black people, okay? All right, query. What reactions do you have to these assertions that racism is systemic, universal, invisible, and perpetuated by the dominant race, i.e. white people? In what ways does this suggest that only white people can be racist? But I just said, Candace Owens, a Black woman, acts in racist ways. What is your belief? Where do you notice these phenomena operating most obviously and dangerously in society? How about we bring it home? How does institutional racism operate in your organization? So I want to stop sharing my screen. I have about 5 more slides. I don't know if we'll get to them or not, but that's okay because I wanted to engage with you all in the chat and also hear from anyone. Is there a distinction to be made between systematic and systemic racism? I think it's a difference without a distinction, quite frankly. DEI have to touch upon topics such as gender and sex, as well as individuals with disabilities. The conversations are becoming more and more common and are critical. Absolutely. When you're talking about diversity, equity and inclusion, you have to talk about the full spectrum of our diversity. And that includes, it's not just race, it includes gender, it includes people with disabilities, it includes gender identity, sexual orientation, it includes the whole breadth of those. When you're talking about race and racism, it gets a little, although intersectionality matters. So I'm a Black woman. I don't know what it's like to experience life as a man because I'm a woman. But being Black has had the biggest impact on me. And I often say that I had a 50-50 chance of being Black, but I had a 50-50 chance of being a female, but there was 100% chance I was going to be Black based on my parentage, okay? Is it appropriate for a white leader in a conversation to call out racist behavior if it stems from a Black or Indigenous person of color? Yeah, I think it is. I'd say that white leader ought to be really steeped, well-versed, deeply steeped in race and racism before doing so, because that is a popular tool, a common tool that white people use against people of color to shut down the conversation. That talking about race makes us racist. Calling out racism makes us racist. And it's one of the reasons that Black people don't trust the motives of white people in these conversations and are oftentimes reluctant to engage in them. So yes, if a Black person is being racist, although I'd say it'd have to be on an individual level because Black people don't have and I would call that prejudice, because racism, as we know, the definition that I subscribe to is prejudice plus institutional power. As we're talking about how our systems work and how the systems in your organization work, and you really can't impact your organization from a racism standpoint unless you deal with the systems that are allowing those things to occur. It's really about dismantling and re-envisioning and re-engaging your systems. But yes, short answer, yes. Longer answer, be careful about that.
This is Jessica, and I just wanted to unmute myself because I'm the one that asked that question. And my intent was not to speak about an example of a Black or Indigenous person of color calling out or saying something that would be interpreted as racist against white people, but more so racist against or harmful to the other Black and Indigenous people of color within the room. I personally I'm from an organization that has majority white leaders and who want to do a good job in having these conversations with staff, but don't necessarily feel it's their role to call that out if they see it, especially if a person of color is taking the time to share their voice, but also is concerned about, preventing any further harm. So I certainly did not mean like that they would be making a statement that was racist against white people, but more so harmful for the others in the room. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks, Jessica, for the clarification. And I would say that it's appropriate, always appropriate, to keep harm from happening. But I said at the beginning, I've stopped saying that I'm creating a safe space because I don't know if everybody feels safe 100% of the time in these conversations. And what people's definition of safe is. I'm creating a brave space, trying to create a brave space where people can speak up. If you have the opportunity to check in with, let's say, a Black person that you think is perpetuating racism against another Black person, I think I'd check in to say, you know, like if I said something like that, Jessica, you know, to say, hey, you know, Tracy made a comment. I'd like to hear from, I just, because I see someone named Ronald Simmons, who appears to be a Black man to me, and my father's name was Ronald, and my brother is Ronald, so I'll pick on Ronald. So you might say, if you heard me say something that seemed like it was racist and harmful to Ronald, you might say, hey, group, Tracy just made a comment, and I'm wondering how others experience it. Ronald, you know, how do you experience that? If you feel comfortable sharing. And let Ronald speak for himself. I will tell you that the dynamics between Black people, again, I'm keeping this to Black folks because this is what I know most about. The dynamics between Black people, we can say things to each other that white people cannot say to us. And I can't unpack that for you right now. You just have to accept it as so. And I see Black people shaking their head like, you know what I'm talking about. I can say some things to Ronald that if you were present in the room and heard it, might seem, oh, I can't believe she said that. But we can say things to each other that you absolutely, that a white person could not say to us. So there are all those dynamics. So I would say rather than accusing a Black person of being racist, I would ask how others are receiving it. How are others in the room receiving it? Does anyone care to share? I wouldn't necessarily even call on a specific Black person, because even if I said something racist or awful, harmful towards Ronald, sometimes Black folks, we also tend to be protective of each other. He might not call me out in front of white people. He might call me out later. He might reach out to me later, but he might not, because again, it's not a safe space, all right? And so sometimes we need to deal with each other privately. So I might not even, in fact, I definitely would not call him specifically out. I would just ask, how are people in the room experiencing that? If anyone wants to share. And if they want to share, fine. If they don't, then your perception is either off or it's dead on, but they don't want to deal with it in that moment, in that space. That makes sense, Jessica?
Yes, that is very, very helpful. Thank you so much for spending the time to really dig deep into that answer. I appreciate it.
Sure. I see a question
Tracy,
here.
I have a question.
Oh, yes, go ahead. Who's that?
This is Latoya.
Okay, hi, Latoya.
How are you? Thank you so much for this training here. I am
Sure.
well. My question is in regards to, you know, our healing journey and just the journey overall. We are, you know, for me, I try to look at things from, you know, different perspectives, right? And so with that, like when I see, because you had attest to a lot of things like where there's the silence or the, you know, that inability to even want to hear your thoughts and things like that. When you are aware of those things in those moments, I tend to personally like, depending on the situation or the space or whatever, go into silence because I am afraid of, you know, how it may be perceived. So, and that's particularly in the workplace. So can you elaborate on that? Because I in some effective ways to show up that way, because I think you did a lot of work in you know, saying how we do that, where just by being authentic and just you know, speaking with grace, basically, rather than reactivity. And so that's still just something that I guess having to still work on because it's a lot.
It is a lot. And thank you for raising. That is one of the places, Latoya, quite frankly, that is one of the caveats of where I found that it's hard for Crucial Conversations framework to really work. And even to some degree, Courageous Conversations around staying engaged. Because sometimes, because of our history of racism, of experiencing racism, of experiencing oppression, sometimes we have to just, as a protective measure, depending on how hot things are getting in that room, we just have to leave the room mentally, emotionally, sometimes physically. And I would say to white people in the room, if you notice that someone who was engaging shuts down, you might try to unpack that or think about why is that happening. Don't call LaToya out and say, LaToya, you stop speaking, what's going on, okay? But you have to understand that for Black people, although we frequently want these conversations brought to the surface because we want it dealt with, for us, it is risky, it is traumatic. It requires a lot. This is my daily work, and it requires a lot of self-care for me to be able to put on my helmet and protective layer of clothing,
Yeah.
figuratively speaking, to
And
come into
Tracy,
these conversations.
it's not even necessarily even within about a conversation of race, it's just their persona, right? And so being able to show up and still be your full self during these conversations, because like I said, I try to look at it from different perspectives. Like this may how they were taught to deal with situations. So it's kind of like you get in that space of confusion where you're not sure if there are ill intentions, or do you just, continue to just be yourself through this conversation, despite these little things that they're throwing out that throws you off that you're not typically used to.
Yeah, yeah, all of that, LaToya. I feel all of that, and I think that you have to protect yourself, right? And the idea that Black people can ever show up fully, authentically, is probably pure folly, quite frankly. We wear a mask, and probably people of color. I don't know that for sure, but I know with respect to Black people, we wear a mask, and it is a protective mask. Because to show up authentically, then that's when Ronald gets called an angry Black man. Tracy gets called an angry Black woman. You're oversensitive. You're making everything about you. You're making everything about race, in conversations about race. So it's very difficult for Black people to show up in the workspace fully authentically. Just because we've learned to navigate this society, we have to keep our masks on. Now, we will come from outside with each other. We take the masks off. During COVID, we wear these masks. Sometimes it's hard to breathe. Aren't you so relieved when you get in your car or get home and you can rip that mask off and exhale and just breathe again? That's the mask that Black people wear. And we feel the same relief sometimes outside of the white gaze, outside of white presence, when we're around each other and we can remove our mask, exhale, and feel like we can breathe again and be authentic with each other. So LaToya, you make good points. I acknowledge the validity of those. It is an ongoing process, and you probably don't get to show up as your full self all the time. And that is okay. That is okay. And we all have to navigate these spaces. Code switching. Maria, code switching, wearing a mask is alive and well for Black and Indigenous people of color when you're out in public or at work, what you wear, what your hair is like, your word choice, speaking in another language, if you're bilingual, absolutely, that's all part of the mask, right? People who speak other than English as their first language. So I am conversationally fluent. I'll claim it. I'm not quite there, but conversationally fluent in Spanish. And so I can be in a restaurant or standing in line and understand what people who are speaking in Spanish in front of me, catch the gist of the conversation and can understand. I also have been present then when white people are just going off because people are speaking Spanish. Like, they need to stop speaking Spanish. This is America. You need to speak English. But why do you care what these people who are not in your life are doing in the grocery store line? Why do you care? Whiteness, that's why you care. White supremacy, that's why you care. White privilege, that's why you care. There's no valid reason for it otherwise. And so that mask, where people who might normally engage in their primary language will speak English to avoid, in public, to avoid those microaggressions. Okay, there are all sorts of masks that Black and Indigenous people of color wear, and that the full spectrum of people of color wear all sorts of masks to avoid the microaggressions and avoid it. So, and code switching. I code switch. I'm very articulate. I speak, you know, as my mother called it, the King's English. But if you heard me around my family and Black friends, you would not hear me talking like this. I code switch to come so that I have credibility and can be taken seriously, and I can remove all the you can't hear me because I'm speaking a different dialect. I don't speak, you know, proper English. Who decided what was proper? It certainly weren't the African peoples who were brought here, right? So we had our languages stripped and our dialects stripped, but whatever. I speak differently around other Black people in different contexts. So that's all part of the mask.
A question,
yeah.
if I can ask, and thank you for this whole course. It's definitely been 1 to 10. I've dealt with in the past as superior who show favoritism to those who are not like myself, who are not Black. And I'm very vocal. And one day I did get upset and I'm like, well, I think you're not being fair. Like, so-and-so is able to do this, but as soon as I did it, the handbook gets pulled out, all these things get thrown at me. You want, you know, this conversation that's never been had before is happening. And then they say, well, I have a Black grandmother. And I'm just trying to figure out, where did that conversation come from? Like, how did that come? Like, it was random when they said it. I still think about it every now and then because it's like, what? Why did you feel the need to tell me that you have a Black grandmother? Like, you look nothing Black. I'm in your office all the time. There's nothing telling me that you even engage with this Black grandmother or anybody. Like, you have other family members up, but I've never seen this Black grandmother that you speak of. And it's just like, I've heard people say, well, I'm not racist because I have Black friends. And it's like, that's not how it works. But if that's how you feel, that's fine, but that's not how it works. How do you deal with spaces like that? And because I was just like the other young lady, I just stopped talking. I just shut down. Like, I had nothing else to say. My face probably said more than the words that verbally left my mouth, but
Yeah.
How do you even interact with someone that thinks that you two are in comparison because they either interact with Black people or got Black friends? I got white friends. I got friends of all race. I'm not even from America myself. I'm from Jamaica. So I'm very diverse in my interactions, but I don't say because I'm in an argument with an Asian or whoever, oh, I have an Asian friend. I just don't say that.
Yeah, I think, thanks. I think that's Sarita talking. So, you know, Black people frequently get accused of playing the race card, right? But because which means we make everything about race and we accuse white people of being racist about everything. But the thing is that because we've lived and experienced this country and experienced this society, we know it when we see it, all right? And, but it's hard to prove. But Black people get accused of playing the race card, but I really think that frequently white people play the race card because they whip out the race card as a way, somehow meaning that my proximity to a Black person or another person of color absolves me from being racist, which couldn't be. My proximity to another Black person or a person of color absolves me from being racist. But that's why it's important to dismantle these crazy notions about what race and racism are, right? And try to come to do this personal journey and come to some understanding about what racism is. And your proximity to another Black person does not absolve you of racist behavior or engaging in microaggressions. It's a deflection, right? And the fact that you have a Black grandmother, I had too. And so what does that mean? And if you say that I'm being racist by accusing you of being racist, then I'll say, well, my sister-in-law is white. That should have been done, right? You're not racist because your grandmother is Black, and I'm not racist because my sister-in-law is white. What does that mean even, right? And so I think that this is where you find yourself dragged in, Sarita, unwittingly into a courageous conversation about race, and saying that that is offensive and it's a deflection from what I'm talking about. I am explaining to you how I've experienced, how I feel about what just happened. And here's what happened. And how I'm receiving that and interpreting that is that it is happening to me because I am Black. And if there's another reason, please explain it to me that doesn't involve your proximity to other people of color or to another Black person, which has nothing to do with what we're talking about. That is having a courageous conversation. Now, that person, having not done personal work, having not been on this workshop, may freak out about that. But sometimes we just have to stand our ground, in those moments, and then be willing to walk away. But that is how I suggest engaging with it. If you're ready for that and, have buckled up and feel comfortable doing so. If you don't feel comfortable addressing it in that moment, then I suggest writing it because it can be very concise. You have time to think about what you're saying ahead of time, or making an appointment to see the person later on when you're calmer and can engage from a place of less emotion. That makes sense, Sarita?
Yes, it does. I'll be talking with this mic on mute. I'm so sorry. Yes, it does.
All right. How do you suggest Black and Indigenous folks Black and Indigenous people of color take care of themselves at this time? It's getting harder and harder to have these conversations. It takes a lot of energy. Whew. Shiraz, whew. Yes, that is facts, truth. Time away. You can't always have these conversations. And sometimes you just have to just detach and go do some other things. Get off social media, stop watching the news, don't talk about it at work, don't volunteer to go to any DEI trainings, and surround yourself with people who love you and that you love and things that bring you joy. So I've had some recent experiences over the last month that have shaken me to my core in terms of being racialized experiences from people that I trusted. And in the workplace. And the microaggressions have been deep, they've hit hard, and they came from, again, people I trusted and I did not see it coming. And it knocked me off my feet. So much so that I really felt like I was not as effective at work. And so what I did, I have an awesome relationship with my boss. And in fact, I consider him a friend. I called him and I said, on last Friday, I called him a week ago and I said, I'm done. I'm done. I can't do this right now and I need a break. So I am taking next week as vacation. And I mean, not the vacations I usually take, working vacations where I'm still answering email. I mean, I am logging out of email. I will not be checking email. I will not be engaging at work at all. Unless somebody dies or the building's on fire or whatever, don't call me about, I was there. That's the point I was at. And he and his wife, again, I consider them friends. And he said to me, we keep offering our condo in Puerto Rico to you and you never take us up on it. Why don't you go to Puerto Rico? And I never take them up on it because I'm a super practical person. You don't just jump on a plane and go to Puerto Rico. Like I have to plan that. I have to think about it. I got to look at my calendar. I have to clear some things from my calendar, all of that. He said that Friday morning at 9 and by 1 p.m. I had a flight to Puerto Rico. And as we sit here, I am sitting in their condo, looking out. The balcony is over there to my left and there is the beach and the ocean. And I left. And so sometimes that's just what you have to do. Now, I don't mean everybody has to take a trip to Puerto Rico. I'd never done something so like last minute in my life. Oh, and I sprung for a first class ticket. You know why? Because I needed somebody to pamper me in that moment. I just needed it. I needed it. And I deserved it. And I believed that about myself. And so I did it. So do those things that bring you joy and step away from it. And that this is self-care for me. Now on Monday, I'm gonna stay here till next Friday. I have to log back into Zoom and open back up my email on Monday morning. I'm coming off of vacation, but I'm staying here to still have some protection and feel, you know, a place of joy and all of that thing for a whole nother week before I step back into the real, you know, back to my real life and everything. But whatever those look like for you, because self-care is real. This stuff will take you out. The stress, the physiological and psychological trauma of racism is real. And, you know, Tupac has a song saying to single women, Tupac cares if don't nobody else care. Traci cares, Black folks, if don't nobody else care. All right, I understand and I get it, and take care of yourselves, whatever that looks like. Disengage, find your place of joy, hug your kids, your spouse, whoever you're in relationship with, go see your Black grandmother, anything that you need to do, because you don't have to fight this every day. All right, we are 3 minutes over. And so I want to thank you guys for your attention today. I hope that this has been helpful, very high level. As we move forward, we're going to get into, you know, modeling this and whatnot. I just wanted to explain the frameworks. Thank you, Pam. I think she had to drop off. Thank you, Billy. And thanks to all of you for your participation. I appreciate it so much. And again, if any of you all want to stay in touch with me, my email is my name, Traci, with an I, Traci@traciellis.com. All right, Traci@traciellis.com. Thanks a lot. Have a great weekend.
Great. Thank you so much, Traci. We really deeply appreciate your time with us this morning, and do reach out to Traci if you have any additional questions, or to me. I've dropped my email in the chat. Do complete the post-session evaluations. I would appreciate that very much. That helps us offer trainings that are meaningful and important to you. And Traci, what a great time to mention self-care. We are about to be Friday afternoon, so I hope everybody takes that invitation and uses it to really take some time for yourself this weekend to process through the really heavy things that we're all working on, and step away if you need to. I'm going to screen share briefly. We have the coming up sessions for the communities of practice for this event. So we hope that the information shared today and in the DEI sessions will help you lead and engage in conversations around racial justice issues and social justice issues. So on April 16th, Traci, along with Ellen Amer, who I think is with us this morning, hi Ellen, are going to co-lead a community of practice sessions from 9 to 10 a.m. on Courageous Conversations. So information is there. If you're registered for the event today, I will share those reminders out with you before the events, and I'll send the information again in the follow-up email from today's event. So you'll receive the session recording, you'll receive information about the community of practice sessions, and you'll also receive any resources that were shared in the chat by everybody learning together here this morning. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day and a fabulous weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. You guys take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Billy, I
you.
inadvertently sent you a direct message with my email, but I caught that and sent it out to everyone. So.
Okay, fabulous. And I'll make sure it goes out in the email to the group again.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a great
Thank you
vacation,
so much.
Traci.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Ronald, for being letting me pick on you.
Absolutely, thanks.
All right.